Okay, so we welcome again Noah Severino from Childhood Cancer Survivor Canada. He's a Chief Operations Officer and a childhood cancer survivor himself, and he's speaking to us tonight about childhood cancer survivorship. So Noah, if you want to start.
Hi, thanks, Sarai, for the kind introduction. I'm a guy who likes PowerPoint, so I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. So just give me a second and bear with me. There we go. It shows that I'm sharing my screen. Could someone just confirm that for me, Sarai? Would you maybe?
I see it, Noah.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks again for having me here. Happy to kind of talk about survivorship as a whole, and then part of what we're doing with Childhood Cancer Survivor Canada, or as we affectionately call it, CCSC. So like Sarai said, there we go. I'm a childhood cancer survivor. Myself, I was diagnosed with rhabdomyosarcoma at the age of 9. And as a result of my tumor and where it was, it's left me visually impaired in my right eye. And again, due to kind of all these other conditions, I have a chronic migraine condition as a result of sort of my tumor and my treatment, and then sort of quite a few late effects. And so it's been quite an experience as far as, being a survivor and having the sort of journey that I've had. And I'm, forever thankful for what I've been able to, accomplish and do. And sort of, I'm very focused on giving back to the survivor community as much as I can. And that kind of brings me to why I'm chatting with you today. So my role is Chief Operations Officer with CCSC, and I sort of help make sure that we're running as smoothly as I can to try and provide a service for childhood cancer survivors, especially those over the age of 18. Just because there is sort of a lack of resources and some other things that I'll get to later on in the presentation. I'm also a big childhood cancer advocate and have done work with the Pediatric Oncology Group of Ontario. I'm also a volunteer at Camp Buchagias, Camp Trillium, and a number of other childhood cancer related projects. During my treatment experience, I actually lived at the Ronald McDonald House in Toronto and am the former Ronald McDonald House Charities Canada Child Ambassador, and currently in my non-childhood cancer world, I work in a national health charity in operations and technology, and I'm fortunate enough to have completed my Bachelor of Humanities from Carleton University, as well as my Master's of Management from the Schulich School of Business at York University. So that's a little bit about me, and now currently happily married with a dog, and just kind of loving life and forever grateful for, all of the things that I've been able to have and be able to accomplish, and sort of looking forward to the future to help, as many people as I can. So Childhood Cancer Survivor Canada. This is a quote from our founder, Dr. Michael Taccone. And it reads, having childhood cancer profoundly impacts the rest of your life. After treatment, the future is filled with unique challenges and uncertainty that no one should face alone. And that's from our founder of CCSC, Dr. Michael Taccone. And this quote really speaks to me because based on my treatment, my cancer, my whole experience, it's definitely been something that lots of people think you finish your treatment and everything goes back to normal. But the reality is, unfortunately, that there is no return to true normal. Things can become more regular, but you're never the same person that you were pre-treatment. And that's probably something that you as parents can recognize as well. But what we're trying to do at Childhood Cancer Survivor Canada is create a community of survivors in an organization that's for childhood cancer survivors by childhood cancer survivors, especially, like I said, those over the age of 18, where, we've transitioned into adulthood and now we're sort of left with what's next. So we know currently that there are about 45,000 childhood cancer survivors in Canada, and at least 50% of those survivors have at least one long-term disabling or life-threatening condition after treatment. And that just kind of goes to show, it's not a return to normal, it's a new normal, and that's okay. It takes some time to learn how to accept that and how to cope with that. And that's, part of the survivor journey that I'm sure, you may or may not be seeing now. But that's just kind of the nature of it, because there's so much that we have to accept being survivors. So like I said, CCSC, our official slogan is "In It Together," but we are by survivors for survivors. There's survivors on our board, there's survivors on our executive, there's survivors on our operations and sort of consulting teams. And that's kind of what makes us unique, because we as a population kind of know what we need. There are sort of 4 pillars to what we do at Childhood Cancer Survivor Canada. Here we go. The first is awareness. The second is education, community, and access. And that's kind of the 4 pillars that we stand on and what we aim to do for the childhood cancer survivor community. And I'll get into a little bit of those activities in a little bit. So part of what I wanted to talk about today was survivorship into adulthood, and someone was kind enough to submit a question in advance, and I'm 100% very much an open book on my childhood cancer experience and my experience into adulthood, and just dealing with survivorship even in the present day. But the future is bright, as this photo kind of just shows. I couldn't resist. But that's not to say that it doesn't come without a bit of work that you have to put in. There are lots of limitations in survivor and challenges that we as survivors face. So there are, sometimes limited social opportunities for survivors, especially if you're a part of a camp community or some kind of community like that, where it's pediatric programming. Unfortunately, the reality is most times when you're over the age of 18, the availability of programming like that, it does decrease. So that's a challenge. And Camp Uchigaeus in the Pediatric Oncology Group of Ontario, POGO, they do actually host now adult themed weekends where you can get together with your survivor friends. You actually get to go to Camp Uch, which is an awesome refresher for a lot of us. But again, that's not an every year kind of thing. It's not the same kind of regular social opportunity that you get by going to camp. Oftentimes there's limited access to reliable and trustworthy resources. So everybody is guilty, myself included, of visiting things like WebMD, where you're trying to find some resources, or you're trying to find some information. And again, there's always the question of, does that really apply to me? I'm not a physician, I'm not educated that way. So it's always hard to find stuff that you can trust. Sometimes, maybe there are small social groups that happen, but there's very limited actual programming to support, the adult world of being a childhood cancer survivor. We are very much, in every sense of the word, a unique population, because our experience, it impacts our lives wholly. For some, it impacts how we grow. For others, it impacts how we develop our capabilities, our abilities. So, different kinds of programming to be able to support that. There are really fantastic organizations out there that try to do some adult programming, but it doesn't always meet what everyone's needs are, which is okay. It's awesome to see some of that. There's also limitations to access to funding for additional support. So when I say that, once you turn over the age of 18 and you've moved out of the pediatric system into the adult system, not to scare anyone, but the reality is that a lot of funding to pay for medication, funding to pay for supportive devices. If you are like me and your dentistry got messed up as a result of all of your treatment, those are some pretty big bills. And when you become an adult, a lot of the funding that's there for childhood cancer survivors, it actually disappears. So it's on the survivor or the family of survivors to sort of help sort of compensate for that. And that can be a challenge, especially since there's no childhood cancer survivor discount for some of these services. So, it's a huge limitation to what's available for survivors. On top of all of that, there's what I call the challenges of survivorship. So, the transition from pediatric to adult care. For me, I was treated at Sick Kids, and now I am seen in an aftercare clinic at Princess Margaret. It's across the road, but it's a very different hospital environment. And the team and the staff there do a fantastic job to be welcoming and supportive of questions, and understanding that again, we're kind of a unique population, but it is a whole entire change of what we as survivors often come to know as, like, this is the place for medical care, this is the team that I know. And it is a pretty big change, and it also ushers in a new sort of era of reliance on self-advocacy on the survivor's part and often on the family's part, because there isn't always a clear-cut path for what's best for you as a survivor. You often have to advocate for those things yourself, which kind of brings me to second point, again, is kind of just that responsibility for your own health. Again, the Pogo aftercare teams are a fantastic resource, but you still have to be able to speak up about how you're feeling, the issues that you're kind of dealing with. On top of the fact that with the trade into from pediatrics to adulthood is the transition to either higher education, employment, or, depending on what sort of your situation is, alternative programming, like day programming and stuff like that. That is a huge transition for anyone to make. But when you add in the sort of impact of being a childhood cancer survivor, as well as the challenges that we face, from things like issues with self-esteem, issues with social isolation, because like I said, things kind of don't go back to normal post-treatment, no matter how normal things may feel. It's a big transition to have to deal with, and it kind of the idea of self-advocacy really encapsulates that, because there's definitely help along the way, but you have to know that you need to ask for it, and that's a big thing. There's also dealing with other mental health issues. For some survivors, maybe mental health issues might manifest once they're out of their childhood home. Once they're out on their own, there's additional stressors, there's additional responsibilities, and there's also just the realities of, for me, when I went to university and started engaging with people who had no idea what my story was, or I was removed from people that I had grown up with. It's a very big realization that your childhood wasn't exactly normal and wasn't exactly the same, because at a very young age we have to deal with a very adult thing. And so coping with being a survivor and learning to adjust and realize that you've had a different experience and be able to take that as positively as you can, it's a lot of work. On top of the fact that there are other disabilities that are sometimes a result of our treatment, a result of our cancer, or other disabilities that one may have regardless of our experience. I, for one, had visual impairment issues prior to my diagnosis. Things were kind of looking up at the pre-diagnosis stage, and then when I got diagnosed with my tumor, pretty much my visual impairment stuff, my tumor literally severed my optic nerve. So I knew I was never going to see again out of my right eye, but there are things that impact me now. In a virtual world, it's really handy to not have to commute, but hours and hours and hours in front of a screen and always focusing on Zoom meetings and things like that. When you have one eye or I'm a self-proclaimed Cyclops, and I'm okay with that. When you have that, it creates eye strain. So how do I accommodate that in, a post-secondary environment, or, even in my professional world? So there's lots of challenges and speed bumps to be able to, or to have to overcome. But I think, the more that we can do as Childhood Cancer Survivor Canada, and the more that I can do as a childhood cancer survivor and advocate, is um, make these challenges more of a speed bump rather than making them a complete roadblock. And that's kind of how I like to think of it. And it's also a really big thing to be able to talk about these things. The more we can share about our survivor experience, the easier it is, and the more awareness that we can have about our population, and the easier it becomes to actually have additional supports to be able to help us. So, like I've kind of mentioned, skirted over, there is help out there. But there are a few things that kind of popped out to me as I was kind of thinking about what is my audience here with OPAC. And, first and foremost, you're all parents. So the biggest thing or piece of advice that I could give, and something that I'm forever thankful that my mother did, was she really helped me learn how to advocate for myself. So medically, she would always invite me to, or always made sure that I was able to speak what I was feeling. And, again, I realized that there are people of different abilities, and that's okay. But to the best of, whoever's ability to be able to talk about how they're actually feeling medically, mentally, that is something. And to be able to advocate for myself post-secondary, even in my place of work, these are all super, super important. And even home. It's sometimes the easiest things that can really improve quality of life for us survivors. The other kind of things that popped out to my mind was that, there are some resources available for adult survivors in Ontario. So Rebounders is a great resource for survivors of brain tumors and some childhood cancers. It's a great social group. They have a lot of fun at those events. As I've kind of mentioned, the Pediatric Oncology Group of Ontario and Camp Uchagas and Camp Trillium are doing some neat stuff to be able to support survivors in their adulthood. Camp Quality has the Breaking Borders program, which is kind of expedition based and a kind of a learning experience. The Pediatric Oncology Group, POGO, again, it has the Survivor to Survivor network, where they're trying to have some sort of workshops for survivors. On top of the POGO transitions program for school and work that is designed to help survivors learn to advocate for themselves, and also, help them find accommodations or the right workplace, or even the right university. They can help with that too. And it's always great to start those conversations earlier than later. One thing that I've kind of been encouraged to explore, and encourage a lot of my peers to explore, is the notion of sliding scales for fees and services. If you can kind of explain situation, because meds aren't cheap, additional supports for disabilities, that they're definitely, there's a cost. But sometimes you can find organizations, especially in the mental health world, that will provide services on a sliding scale, which is an important thing that everyone comes to learn, especially as stereotypical broke students. One thing that I didn't take advantage of until my third year of university, which I really regret, was that there are benefits through the student union that are kind of just there, but you don't really have a really great introduction to what you can take advantage of. But when I finally did take advantage of them, it helped reduce the cost of my meds. And as a student, that was super, super helpful. And the other thing is, I'm thankful to be able to be as functional as I am. And I know that that's not always the circumstance. But I myself was tested at a neuropsych assessment to kind of support my claims for accommodations in post-secondary. And what we took advantage of at SickKids was the assessment center that they connected us to there, and that was quite pivotal for me to be able to succeed in university, because I had the documentation right from the get-go, and the costs for that, I believe it was free, or there may have been fairly low costs associated with it. Whereas if I had waited until I was in university and realized that I needed that documentation, it would have cost, about half a year's tuition to be able to get the right documents to get me the accommodations that I needed. So don't let that one fall off your radar, parents, because that one's pretty important. And I was checking the chat there. There are a bunch of resources that we have on the CCSC website, and I will get to that momentarily. But I'm definitely happy to share sort of my knowledge again in written form, and Sarai can share that around. So, there is help out there. There is other organizations, but it still isn't enough. There's lots of great stuff out there to support us as survivors. But especially what we felt at Childhood Cancer Survivor Canada, CCSC, I'm just going to abbreviate it from here forward, was that we could do more to be able to help survivors as much as we can. And so let me just make my slide move. There we go. And so we're back to the pillars. So these are kind of the 4 things that we felt were key to being able to provide or start to create a survivor community and a survivor identity and a way to be able to help survivors across Canada. So again, we've got awareness, education, community, and access. And so what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about what we're doing in each of these sorts of areas, and we'll kind of go from there. So for awareness, really what we're trying to do is give survivors a voice. So on our website, we have adult survivors of all ages and diagnosis. We're working on building our library, but kind of to give survivors a place to share their story. Lots of us, the more survivors I talk to, the more I realize that we all want to give back. We've all been impacted. We've all, it's almost like this calling. And for some of us, sometimes things like survivor guilt is a huge thing that sometimes motivates, activity. And it also just is a very real problem. And the more we can help people, sorry, my dog, the more we can help people and, the bigger impact we can make, sometimes it helps us, as wrong as this, kind of feels to say, it kind of makes us feel worthy of being able to be here still. And that's a really hard thing to have to come to terms with. But, the more we can share the survivor experience and share the survivor story and help people understand that childhood cancer doesn't just go away when you're done treatment. It sticks with you. It's just our way of highlighting the survivor community and making us more understood by more people to be able to get more help from the government, more funding, more access to resources, and more programming, which is all really important, especially as our population starts to grow. And it doesn't really fit into awareness, but it kind of does. But we have lots of volunteer opportunities, especially for those over the age of 18. Again, we aren't unwelcoming of high school volunteers if that's something. We're working on growing our organization to be able to serve more and more people, but we need obviously the people power to be able to do that. So there are volunteer opportunities for survivors that you can always check out our website and see what's there. Right now, obviously, everything is virtual, and that's okay too. There are some virtual opportunities as well. Our goal is basically just to share the survivor story loud and proud. Okay, education. We're doing some pretty neat stuff here. So we are building Canada's first online resource, online educational resource for survivors. So, these are in constant revision, and we're kind of adjusting the layout and maybe what the titles are. But there's survivorship basics, CCS 101. We've got ideas, or we've got articles on understanding treatments and side effects, and we've got care after childhood cancer. We're also trying to explore what are some of the things as an adult that you have to learn to do. Typically once you're into adulthood, most survivors at the very least get echocardiograms, playing that surveillance game. So there's our very own Dr. Michael Taccone getting a echocardiogram on camera, and hopefully the future development of some educational resource to be able to help survivors not feel scared of tests, because one of the issues that can be seen with survivors is when you're under the age of 18, you have parents who take you to appointments, and that's phenomenal. But eventually it gets to the point where booking those appointments falls on the survivor. And sometimes survivors don't always book the right appointment, not the right appointments. They don't always book their aftercare appointments because there's sort of like that fear of cancer recurrence. There's fear of doctors. There's so many factors that kind of go into the realities of booking an appointment, that sometimes survivors don't return back to their aftercare. And one of the things that we're trying to highlight as well is that it's really important that survivors are getting post-treatment care, long-term aftercare surveillance. So we want to try and make that as engaging as we can. The other thing that we're doing is a webinar series called Survivor Ed. So we're trying to make some educational videos. We bring in some experts to be able to talk about various themes. So you can see we had someone talking about emotional health. We had someone talking about sexual health. That was an 18 plus webinar, obviously, just the nature of it, but these are all technically open to the public again. And then we had a conversation about mental health. This October, we have someone from the POGO transitions team talking about school and work accessibility for survivors, because within Ontario there is POGO, but there isn't the same sort of supports in other provinces. So giving an outlet for survivors across Canada to be able to do that. In the December 2021 version of Survivors Ed has not yet been announced, and you're also the first people hearing that we're doing this on school and work, all about accessibility for survivors. So there you are, first to know. There you go. And then we're doing like access. So like I mentioned, someone mentioned in the chat, they're looking for some resources. We are working on building our resource library. The Pediatric Oncology Group of Ontario also has a fantastic resource library. We're right now, like I said, kind of focused on making sure survivors are getting into aftercare, but slowly collecting and picking up the pieces around other smaller organizations that are doing stuff for childhood cancer survivors on a national scale. Again, it's a little bit challenging because well, a lot of us are here in Ontario. We have people from all over Canada who attend CCSC events. We are trying to build that national survivor identity, but a lot of us know a lot of things within Ontario. So like I said, I'll make sure that I provide that list that I kind of rambled off. And then last and not least is the idea of community. So not only are we holding Survivor Ed online, we're holding a bunch of online events to build community. Prior to the pandemic, we were doing photo shoots, to build some content for our website and for presentations like this, but also just a fun and silly place where survivors of all abilities were able to come out, and we just took photos and had a lot of fun. And that's just a great way for us to be able to build community, and definitely something that I look forward to getting back to once COVID is over. Some of the events that we've sort of scheduled, I realized I put one of these up and it ended up getting canceled due to some unforeseen circumstances, but Survivor Spotlight is unfortunately what got canceled. But the idea behind it is, let's highlight survivors that are doing some pretty neat stuff out in the world. Last year we held our first Survivors Got Talent, and it was just an opportunity for survivors to literally share their talent. It was a talent show that we held online. It's It's really awesome. This early summer, we had a Soul Survivor event, and what we were doing was yoga. We had a survivor instruct yoga, which was awesome. And then we did a few iterations of Survivor trivia. So not necessarily childhood cancer themed, but for the childhood cancer community. And this picture to me just kind of captures the survivor community so well. We've got siblings in there, we've got parents, we've got survivors, and sort of outside of that sort of immediate scope is, we've also got friends, we've got, other relatives. The survivor community and the survivor collective as a whole, all of us wouldn't be here without, our parents and our families. And so it's also really important for us to be able to, welcome our broader survivor community to most of these events, and just be able to, have a place for adult survivors. So getting involved in CCSC, we have something called the Survivor Advisory Committee, and what we're doing there is we're inviting survivors of, diverse populations to be able to help, give us some feedback on some of the programming and things that we're doing. There are, like I said, volunteer opportunities for survivors specifically, and then opportunities for the survivor community as a whole. We've got events, as I've kind of elaborated. We've got a mailing list, and that's where you can find out all of the information of what we get up to. And we've also got CCSC swag, because we're survivors and we like to let it shine. So some of our swag is that we have this button campaign. And so what we're kind of doing is we kind of suggest, like, for a donation, you can kind of highlight the buttons. And again, it's just kind of to create awareness, create that sense of community. So I am one. I love one. My wife wears that one. My friends have I know one buttons. And for some of us survivors and parents and broader people of the survivor community, there's also an I miss one, because that's just a reality of, who we are as a survivor community, unfortunately. And we have masks. With the breakout of the pandemic, we have the Wear It For Us masks, which are my favorite, because it's not only supporting some of the activities that we do, but it's also wear it for your childhood cancer survivors who, are obviously at risk of enough. Let's protect us from COVID. And the CCSC logo one is just a lot of fun too. And hey, we're social. I'm here. I'm talking to you. I might as well plug our social media channels. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram and LinkedIn. So feel free to give us a follow, and get your survivors to give us a follow too. And so I'm going to turn off my PowerPoint now. But if you have any questions, ideas, feedback, check us out online, because you never know what you might find there. And B, feel free to send me an email, even though that says info@childhoodcancersurvivor.org, still comes to me. So I'm happy to answer any questions. And of course, there are some questions that got sent to me. And if any other questions got asked in the chat, or if you want to ask them to me face to face, I'm more than happy to answer. So I'm going to stop my screen share. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. No, that was a great presentation and very heartfelt, very honest. Thank you for sharing your story as well. And I was wondering if anybody has any questions right now. Like Noah said, you can type them in the chat. I do see one question that Lynn had asked, and she said, childhood cancer is a family experience. Siblings are able to take part in programming under the age of 18. I'm assuming that's similar to the survivor themselves. They have to self-advocate, siblings do, and assuming no programming available for families after the survivor ages out. Any thoughts on the siblings and after aging?
And that's a fair statement. I'm wondering, maybe Lynn, if you would be able to clarify your question a little bit, as far as having survivors present, or siblings and other family members at sort of CCSC events. Nothing is explicitly closed off. We do have some activities that are generally more survivor focused, so a sibling might not necessarily get the same sort of value out of one of those events, but if it's kind of an explicit survivor experience, we usually do our best to kind of call that out. As far as like other programming, are you referring to things like rebounders or Camp Hooch or other pieces like that? Because unfortunately, I can't speak to that, just because I don't know. But I definitely agree that it is a a family experience. My family. When I was treated, we lived in the wrong telehouse for a year, and that meant my mom and my stepdad and my little brother were all kind of together in that room. And so these are things that he doesn't remember because he's younger than I am, but they are still just very much a reality of survivorship and of treatment. So I'm wondering if you would be able to just elaborate on what kind of programming you're talking about, or if I've answered that question, then that's okay too.
Yeah, thanks for that, Noah. That does help quite a bit. What I was alluding to a little bit there with some of the programming would be similar to a survivor who may be heading off to college or university and experiencing that world without the network or the nucleus of the family. A sibling who has also been through the trauma of this cancer journey, they may also experience some emotional and mental health requirements. And is that just more of a go through normal mental health avenues? There isn't sort of your organization doesn't provide anything for the siblings themselves?
No, unfortunately, to the best of my knowledge, and again, CCSC, like I said, we're kind of primarily adults, just because there is that huge sort of gap. Again, teens and parents, all welcome to sign up for, the mailing list and all of those sorts of things. I can't really speak to what other organizations' rules around siblings are, but in regards to that transition to work or school, I totally know where you're coming from, and I can sympathize, but I don't know of anything. Most of the services that I personally have accessed, whether it's the neuropsych assessment team at SickKids, that was a physician referral from my aftercare clinic. And the Pediatric Oncology Group of Ontario's transition program. I can't speak to the requirements, but your survivor may or may not get referred there if they're kind of questioning. The next best thing that I would probably suggest is just making sure you have a really good guidance counselor, because believe it or not, usually most high school guidance counselors have a pretty good idea of what university may be better for supporting those combination questions. Carleton University was an awesome place to be. Counselor on top of the actual counselor at high school. So that's kind of what I would next best recommend, or like you said, kind of the usual channels, unfortunately.
No, you kind of froze there a little bit when you were, it just
Sorry.
said Carleton University, and then for me at least, it just says that your bandwidth was low and you kind of froze for a bit.
Excellent.
I don't know if you can repeat that little part.
Yeah, so I was just gonna say it's really important to, Carleton had a fantastic accessibility center for me to leverage as a student, and that it was my guidance counselor that knew that they had an excellent disability support center on top of my counselor from the transition program offered by POGO. So they do know, they are aware of the different supports. And the other thing that is also a resource, especially for siblings as they kind of make those big transitions, is Usually at post-secondary, there are mental health services available. And so kind of pursuing that early on to get support is never a bad thing.
Thank you. There was one question submitted in advance to Noah, and it was, what was most helpful to you as a child post-treatment? Conversations with parents, peers that had gone through the same experiences, counseling, what helped you?
So quite honestly, I grew up in a very, I grew up in Northern Ontario. My experience with my treatment was I was entirely removed from my home. I didn't really go home for about 10 months. And so I felt very socially isolated and very different from my peers when I returned. And there weren't a lot of childhood cancer survivors that were near me. And so a lot of my learning to cope and becoming comfortable with my situation in part was, at camp where, 2 weeks doesn't seem like a long time, especially as adults. You take a 2-week vacation, you're like, wait, it's over already. But having the ability to talk to other survivors that way was really awesome. And that's also something that I tried to pursue also in my post-secondary education. I found another survivor sort of close to me, and we would chat too. I think the more I realized, and reflect on my experience, I think it didn't really matter who I talked to, but being able to talk about it. And that's a really hard thing. Not all survivors are as much of an open book as I am about my survivorship experience, and that's okay too. But I think learning to talk about it in some capacity is probably what I would say, especially because it kind of circles back to that self-advocating sort of piece. So if your survivor is shy and or can't talk about their survivor experience, maybe try and help them find someone that they could be comfortable talking to. So for some people, it's complete strangers. Hi, I'm Noah. Oh, yeah, my eye's a little bit weird. I had childhood cancer. What do you know? And welcoming questions. Sometimes it's, talking to my friends, talking to my partner. Even a great step is, talking to a pet. I had cancer when I was a kid. Things are different. And, there's no judgment from a pet, which is also like a really great place to start. I never sort of had any counseling after my treatment and after that whole experience. So I can't really speak to a personal experience from that, but I know that that's a really valuable experience for a lot of survivors too. And I know that, even in some of my interactions with adult survivors, sometimes people want to talk to people who are aware of the childhood cancer sort of sphere and hullabaloo of what it is to be a survivor. And sometimes survivors just want to talk and not be attached to that survivor identity. So it's kind of a work with your survivor, work with your patient to try and help them understand what would be best for them. I as much as I'd love to say that there's a blanket statement or whatever, for me it was a combination of a lot of those things. And even my experience working with the Ronald McDonald House charities, where I was talking about being removed from home and getting pretty intense treatment in a place that kind of felt like it was a home away from home. That can be traumatic, and that can be also really different. But talking about it, talking. It's a lot of what I do, and that's kind of just, I think, where it starts, and that also just helps promote a broader understanding of who we are as childhood cancer survivors. Because we have the Go Gold campaign, which I've seen OPAC, you guys share some of the awesome stuff that they're doing, but there's also not a lot of awareness. So I was in Toronto, right downtown, right near the CN Tower when it lit up gold. Not on the first night that it did it, but shortly thereafter, and people are like, oh, why is it yellow? That's exactly why we need survivors to be able to talk about it. And that's, part of what CCSC is trying to do, make an identity, make a community. And the more survivors and parents and more of the survivor community that we have sort of supporting us, the louder our voices become, which in the end is just a great value for us as survivors.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. Talking. That's how people get to understand each other, and that's raising awareness. Does anyone have any questions for Noah? I don't think so. No, I think it's been a great presentation, especially you touched upon, there were some things I was thinking about it that you touched upon, like the transition between the pediatric and adult healthcare system. That's something OPAC has been wanting to talk about, like a speaker from Princess Margaret or something like, that difference. We hear that a lot, that it's really different. And you touched a bit upon that, but also how important it is to have the follow-ups for survivors. We're always posting articles, on late effects and things like that, and how important it is for survivors to advocate for themselves, their own health care and everything like that. And also that there isn't enough for survivors post-treatment or anything. Like we had a mom just the other day asking my daughter, she's still a child, but she's 4 years post-treatment. And there's no funding for helping, like transportation to get her to appointments at sick kids. They live kind of far. And there's just not a lot out there, right? But I know CCSC is probably not in a financial position right yet, because you all started this recently, but maybe something like that eventually, once you do. Is that something like a goal to help financially, some like scholarships or financially safe for survivors?
I mean, that's a fantastic question. And, I am thankful, like CCSC is my, is part of what I do in volunteering. So it's all after hours. So I'm thankful enough to have full-time employment, which is also a really big challenge for survivors, sometimes just because of our abilities. But I don't want to make any promises around funding or anything like that, but those are the kinds of things that we as survivors can also recognize, especially into adulthood. And there are lots of dreams that I think we want to be able to come to answer for survivors across Canada. I think a big part of our mission right now is to create that survivor community. So, parents, folks who are still on this call, please feel free to follow our mailing list. Your survivor is super young, that's okay. Follow us on the mailing list. We don't spam anyone, but things might not be applicable to you, and that's okay. But encourage your survivor to sign up for the mailing list. There's just lots of good fun that we try to have and build that community. And I think for us, the stronger community we can build, if we can show that we have volumes of people who are feeling these issues, transportation, mental health, dentistry, that is a huge issue that, if you don't get it addressed before the age of 18, that's something that comes back as an adult, and it's costly. We all know. Things like that, the more of a community and the more an identity of survivors we have, the better the case we have to be able to advocate for the kinds of things that you're kind of asking about, Sarai. So yeah, that's what I would say is just help us build our community of survivors of all ages, but again, especially adults, like we kind of said, just because we're trying to fill that gap. But help us build that community, and the more we have in terms of people who have these issues and people who we can help, the better the case we have to be able to solve some of those problems.
Yeah, thank you. And your website is right there behind you, childhoodcancersurvivor.org.
There it is.
And
yep.
You have resources on there. OPAC also has links on our website at opac.org/links. And a lot of those groups you mentioned, rebounders and camp quality, and a lot of them are also on our website. But Noah, if you can send me a more targeted list maybe of those resources that you mentioned, I'll put them up on there and send it to the participants and put it online as well. And yeah, that's great. And just one final call. Any more questions before we wrap it up? Not of thank yous.
No, honestly, thank you everyone for giving me the opportunity to just kind of, again, it's kind of share my story, but also share what we want to do for survivors, your patients in the future. And honestly, the more you can help us build our community, the more we can help the people that you love and support and your survivor communities. So
yeah, absolutely. And OPAC is always happy to share any of your events or programming and services that you offer. So make sure I think we're signed up for your mailing list already anyway, and your social medias. And just to let everybody know about OPAC, we also have a virtual session with our parent liaisons weekly Tuesday nights at 7:30 p.m. every week, where you can talk to our parent liaisons, Susan, Michelle, and Karen, about whatever issues, questions about anything that you have as parents of a child with cancer. Or a survivor as well. And we also just have to plug it real quick. Tomorrow, our fundraising online silent auction ends. It's at 32auctions.com/OPAC. And that's a kind of a big fundraiser for OPAC this year, a virtual auction. So you can check that out. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Noah, thank you so much again for this wonderful presentation. I'll put it up on our OPAC socials and YouTube channel tomorrow. And yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much again.
And thank you for giving me the audience too. It's always great to talk to parents and future survivors in the community. So thanks again, everyone.
Hey,
and again,
thank you.
feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.
Good night.